Hey, okay. This is Jaycie from the Forbidden Cities podcast, impulsively recording a mini episode of the Forbidden Cities podcast, I guess. I haven't come up with a good name for the miniature rants, but it's just whenever I come up with a theory that I think is exciting enough to post something about, but it's not like a full-length episode. It's not with Sydney. It's just something small that I wanted to post and still put out somewhere. So I have it here on the YouTube channel. This is only the second episode I've done like this, but I think a lot of people liked the last one, so I thought it would be interesting to do another. So the topic of this mini episode is whether or not Kenric is Mr. Forkle, or like the theory surrounding that. Where did that come from? When did that start? What is the evidence for that and the evidence against it? And so hopefully this is kind of a comprehensive guide on that. I've tried to compile all of the evidence that I've heard for it, all the evidence I've heard against it, so I can just have one thing with all of the information, haphazardly compiled from DMs and text messages, and hopefully most of what we mention in the podcast and Instagram stories and all of that. So to begin, I've been determined for a while to have Kenric be alive in some way, and I was trying to find theories about that, or just more theories about why he would have done it, what he would have been doing in the meantime, that sort of thing. So what I started doing was just Googling theories about Kenric and theories about what if Kenric was captured, which is my favorite theory about how he could be alive. And I came across this Reddit post, and the title of it, hold on, I'm going to double check what it was to make sure I quote it correctly. The title of it caught my eye. It was, "Is Kenric one of Forkle's identities?" And it was an r/Keeper of the Lost Cities, which I didn't even think about. Of course that exists, but I didn't even think about the fact that Keeper Reddit could exist. So it was pretty cool. And I actually came across this right when Hurricane Helene had hit, and I couldn't contact Sydney, and I was having a crisis. So I posted some of this stuff on the Instagram story. So if you're over there, you probably saw it. And I read through the article, and basically it had a bunch of evidence that I hadn't even thought of, because this had halfway crossed my mind before, but I was oh, that's so out there, there's no way. But it had a bunch of evidence that really seemed to point to it. So the biggest one, I think, that I'll start with, was Forkle's Wonderling. It was a few different colors, and one of them was red, and that's unexplained by his other identities. So let me find that description really quick. This is in Nightfall, page 213, and it said, "The trunk was narrow, but the bark was thicker than the other trees, and coarser too, with a swirled pattern of brown and gold and red and black, and even a few threads of green. The leaves were equally varied, some wide and flat, some thin and curled, some shiny, and others covered in a cottony fuzz. Berries sprouted among them, the exact blue of Mr. Forkle's eyes." And I thought it was interesting, the Wonderlings reflect the physical appearance of the person. And Mr. Forkle's Wonderling had brown for the hair of Forkle, which I don't know if that's accurate because he has gray hair. So what is the brown? Black for Magnet Leto's hair, blonde for Sir Aston's hair, and red, which I thought was unexplained. There aren't a lot of characters with red hair. There's Syra and then Kenric, and kind of the Disney's Dex. I don't remember if all of them have strawberry blonde hair or not, actually, but I know Dex does, and Adeline. But other than that, I can't think of any other characters with red hair, and I double checked the wiki and it backed me up. I guess it's wrong sometimes apparently, but it backed me up so far. There are not any other characters I can think of. So then I also thought it was weird that there were a few, what did it say specifically, a few threads of green, which mentioned continuously throughout the series, at least continuously as Kenric comes up, he has flecks of green in his eyes. Maybe that was one time and I just think about it a lot. Not important. The problem is, if he is Kenric, it's extra messed up that he's not dead. So this is kind of the point against that, because that's the biggest evidence. There's a lot of small things, my sister noticed this again too, so it wasn't just me, but whenever Sophie asks Magnet Leto if he has a wife, and he gets really sad and says he never got married. I can actually pull that up really quick. It's in Everblaze, and he says, she asked, "How would you feel waking up after all those years and finding out your wife was dead?" And Magnet Leto said, I don't have a wife. His voice had turned thick, his face twisted with emotion, though Sophie doubted even an empath could translate it. I'm sorry, she said quietly. It's not... And I still... Not that it matters. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her anymore. His gaze had turned distant, like he'd fallen deep into a memory. And as she studied his face, she realized Master Leto was much older than he looked. His ears weren't pointed, but he had ancient eyes. The bells chimed their intricate peal, drawing him out of his trance. You'd better go, he reminded her. He didn't follow her as she headed up the twisted staircase, and when she glanced down a few floors later, he was still standing there, staring into space, looking even more confused than she felt. That's so weird that he would be that, like that just can't be okay, I'm, like, processing this. That can't just be, like, a random, like, it's, like, a whole page that Shannon put in there. That's intentional. Like, that has something to do. Like, that's one of those things that it's, like, you spent so much time on this that if it's just, like, well, he's this random guy we've never met, and he actually, you know, he gave up this love, whatever, because of maybe the twin thing, it's like, oh, well, but, like, that, at least for me, and a lot of people remember that, like, they may not remember how in-depth it was, but, like, Sydney remembered that when I mentioned it to her. It's like, that seems like if you mention something like that it's going to be important. It doesn't seem like a little aside that you can just throw in there and it not really be explained. So, that's the same thing with just his identity, like, in a bigger way. Having there be this big mystery surrounding his original identity is interesting because I feel like if you just have it be some random character we've never met, then it's like, what was the point of there being all of this mystery around it? Like, it built up to nothing for the readers. So, anyways, obviously there's more people that it could be, but the fact that the only identity we don't know at this point is his real identity, at least that's been implied, because he said he lived 5 lives in Lodestar when he died, or when one of them died, and we have 4 of them. We have Forkle, the Doctor, he named some of them in Neverseen, Forkle, the Doctor, Sir Aston, Magnet Leto. We don't have his real identity. The Doctor being the human doctor that, like, you know, helped Sophie's human mom have Sophie. But anyways, we have those 4 identities, and he named some of them. Like, he named the human doctor in Neverseen, so I know that he counts that as one of the 5. We just don't have his real identity. So, I don't know. I just don't know who else it could be, especially with the red and his Wonderling. What would that be there for? And I will die if Shannon makes that the human doctor. If his human doctor had red hair, like his human doctor disguise was red hair. That's just, like, who else would it make sense that wouldn't have a wife, that would be sad about it, that is a telepath, a really strong telepath, who's really good at hiding memories in people's minds in a specific way that it wouldn't be triggered unless you thought of the specific trigger word. Okay, I'm coming up with this right now. This is the first time I've ever said this, but whenever Kenric asked Prentice to be his keeper, he went in detail about how he has this specific way to hide memories so that, like, if, like, it won't be triggered unless you think of the specific trigger, and it was, like, the way that he said it was like, that's not the normal way to do it, you know? It's like something that he came up with, that he figured out. And whether or not it was entirely unique to him, that is something that Forkle did with Sophie, which is why that made me think of Forkle so directly. And I'm just now, like, putting that together exactly. Like, I don't want Kenric to be Forkle. I just intellectually think a lot of things would make sense, you know? I don't want Orly to be in love with Mr. Forkle, just in, like, a purely, like, kind of way. But also, I don't like the idea that Kenric would have pretended to be dead and let her suffer, which is what Mr. Forkle said. Weird that was the first thing that he said. But he said that in Neverseen whenever we found out Finton was alive. And he said it so quickly and so, like, well, Kenric wouldn't want us to suffer his loss. Also, like, look over there. Like, that's more important than Kenric. Let that thought go now. I've always thought that was suspicious. But I think the only way for this theory to be true is that Kenric's kind of like a messed up person, and that it is Forkle. In Lodestar, Mr. Forkle mentions that Magnet Leto was almost elected instead of Counselor Lena in Kenric's place, which is interesting. And Grady says, I've been wondering about that. What would you have done if he'd been voted in? And Mr. Forkle responds, I truly had no idea. In all my years with my order, it never crossed my mind that any of my identities might be considered for the council. It stirred quite the controversy among the collective. Personally, I didn't fret too much since I assumed I'd never win. But if I'd been wrong, I would have accepted the position. The same means that allowed me to live among humans for 12 years would have allowed me to be both Black Swan and counselor. And so that's also interesting because, like, on the one side, if he's not Kenric, then this is, like, a pretty solid passage. He says, I'd never thought about my identities could have been considered for the council. But on the other side, if he is Kenric, he could be referring to these, like, created identities, Forkle, Aston, Leto, and the Doctor as his identities, and considering Kenric as just himself, not his alternate identities. So that could be, like, a play on words that he's using to play it off. He could totally just be lying. Don't know why he would just lie, but, you know, of course, that's always a possibility with Forkle. I think that just saying, like, well, he could have been lying to every, like, piece of alternate evidence, like, every time you say that, it makes your theory a little bit less credible. So that's why I don't know exactly where I land on this, because I can see the really compelling evidence in favor of it and the stuff that makes me not want to believe it. And let me see, what was the other thing? Oh, well, the other side of this that is kind of on the side of the Kenric theory is that he says, like, he could have been a counselor and he would have been able to pull it off. And another thing that works out is the order of deaths is that Kenric dies off in Everblaze and the twin dies off in Lodestar. So it's not like, well, his twin died off and he kept being a counselor. How did that happen? Like, we can't disprove it using that. Mr. Forkle obviously was never in the same room with Kenric. And to take it a step further, there is no other telepath in the series that he hasn't been in the same room as before. Now, that doesn't mean, or besides his, like, confirmed identities, now that doesn't mean that he couldn't be a different person, a non-telepath, and he has more than one ability. That's fully possible, but I think that, I don't know. I think that the way that Forkle acts in Book 9, in Stellar Loon, like, being like, oh, well, the Elysian thing's probably nothing. Let's not look into that. I don't think he would act like that if he was Kenric. That's another thing, because obviously Kenric knew it was important, unless Forkle was just playing mind games with everyone and he knew it was important and he was trying to keep Sophie and everyone away from it because he thought it would keep them safe. I think that's stupid. So kind of what it comes down to, and I'm recording this on my phone later, sorry if the audio sounds weird, it's just because I realized I wanted to have a kind of compiled image of what the evidence looks like on both sides of the theory, since I promised an organized, concise piece about this theory, is Forkle could be Kenric because of the Wonderling looking like Forkle. He's sad about not having a wife. He's the only male telepath that hasn't been in the same room with Forkle after Lodestar. He said that he would accept a position on the council and that it would be possible for him to be a counselor. It would be weird for the big identity reveal to be someone we don't know, and, you know, we know that Forkle's real identity is probably a telepath and probably has red hair. He has the same way of hiding memories as Kenric. He changes the subject really fast when Sophie wonders if Kenric's alive and if Kenric's her father. And he wanted to keep people away from Elysian, and he tries to steer Sophie away from it. But maybe not. He probably isn't Kenric, because Shannon said Kenric would be pretty messed up if he let people mourn him if he was really alive, and he was able to tell them that he was alive. And she's right, he would be messed up for that. His true identity, Forkle's true identity, could be a non-telepath with red hair that we've never met, or maybe the red is just in there to throw us off. Who knows? Number 3, Forkle seemed to imply that he wasn't already a counselor when he said that he could have been a counselor as Magnet Leto, and I feel like having 2 counselor people would be hard, like him and his twin being in the same place would be kind of crazy. Number 4, Gross. I don't want Orly to be in love with Mr. Forkle. Ew. Number 5, the fact that he knows how to hide memories in the same way as Kenric might just mean that they had the same washer training, because Kenric says it's just part of his washer training. And number 6, Kenric wanted Sophie to have his cache with the information about Elysian in it, but Mr. Forkle seems to have no idea about Elysian. He's like, there's no place with 5 rivers. This is ridiculous. And he's constantly trying to push Sophie away from Elysian, which doesn't make sense if Kenric wanted Sophie to have his catch and wanted Sophie to have the information inside of it and to uncover these secrets, because that's what would seem to be true from the fact that he left it to her. So like Forkle could be intentionally keeping her away from it, but why would he do that if he was the same person as Kenric? Or he could genuinely not remember it, but why wouldn't he have told Sophie to stay away from it? Oh, it must be really dangerous. I think the way that Forkle acts surrounding Elysian and surrounding Kenric's forgotten secrets doesn't line up with him actually being Kenric. So, anyways, leave in the comments what your theories are and what other little mini episodes you would be interested in if you have any other ideas, because I like doing these. They're pretty easy to record really quickly and publish. And yeah, it's pretty fun. So I hope you have a good day. Thanks for listening.